The sky never forgets. It waits, quietly, endlessly, for something to return. For months, astronomers across the world had been watching it, their telescopes pointed at one faint, drifting light. A tiny speck named 3I Atlas, another traveler from beyond our solar system. They said it came from somewhere between the stars, a place colder, darker, and older than anything we remember. Another interstellar visitor, silent, indifferent, just passing through, like the others before it. But then, something changed. It started with a flicker, a small, strange pulse hidden deep in the data, too faint for the eye to catch, but clear enough for the machines to whisper, "Something isn't right." At first, the team thought it was just noise. A sensor glitch, a pixel artifact. Space is unpredictable like that, a graveyard of false alarms. But then the light curve appeared, and that's when everything stopped. It wasn't irregular, it was impossible. The light didn't behave like an asteroid. It didn't reflect sunlight the way it should. Instead, every few hours, its brightness changed in perfect rhythm, like a pattern, like a pulse, like a message. One scientist described it as a whisper written in mathematics. Another refused to speak about it at all. For weeks, they stared at their screens, watching the numbers rise and fall like a heartbeat. Every new dataset replaced excitement with unease. The object wasn't just rotating, it was reacting. Sometimes it dimmed just as a telescope pointed at it. Other times it flared bright for no reason, almost aware. And for the first time in decades, the science of the sky felt personal. Late at night, when the observatories emptied and the screens dimmed, some of them confessed. They felt like it was watching back. You see, astronomy is supposed to be pure. Numbers, angles, light. But this felt alive. The director of the Hualalai Observatory, Dr. Maren Quill, wrote in her notebook that night, "Light has patience. It outlives fear. Maybe it's trying to tell us something." Those pages were never meant to be read, but they were found months later when everything had already gone wrong. The first public mention of 3I Atlas came quietly. A short press release, a few lines of data tucked beneath bigger headlines. Most people ignored it. Another rock from another star. But within the small, silent world of those who watch the heavens, conversations began to ripple. Old colleagues started sending encrypted emails, private chat rooms filled with fragments of its data signature, the repeating light pattern that didn't match any known rotation. Someone joked about it being artificial. No. One laughed. Then, without warning, Atlas stopped transmitting updates for 32 hours. For a world measuring time down to microseconds, that kind of silence was deafening. Then the next reading came in, and it changed everything. The light hadn't vanished, it had split. 3I Atlas wasn't one object anymore. It was two synchronized points of light moving together, dancing almost. The models broke instantly. Whatever it was doing, no known physics could explain it. Dr. Quill and her team spent 3 nights running simulations. But no matter how they adjusted for gravity, shape, or spin, it didn't fit. Every model reached the same dead end. The data was saying one quiet, terrifying thing. This object is self-directed. They didn't release that conclusion publicly. They couldn't. But in hushed tones, in half-lit corridors, people began to use a word they hadn't said in decades, not since the Voyager anomaly. They called it responsive light. By late autumn, every major observatory had joined the watch. The European Southern Telescope, Mauna Kea, infrared systems in Chile and South Africa. Even private satellites began tuning in. Every night, across continents, hundreds of scientists sat in quiet rooms, their faces bathed in blue glow, all watching one single, fading point of light that did not behave like a rock. And as it passed through the inner solar system, its trajectory shifted, not by coincidence, but by will. At least, that's how it felt. Something unseen was guiding it, adjusting course, aligning it toward a corridor of space that brushed close to Earth's orbital path. The announcement came in the final hours of December. The projections confirmed it. 3I Atlas would pass nearest to Earth on March 6th. A harmless flyby, they called it. But behind the microphones and confident smiles, the scientists weren't sleeping. Every data point since October told the same impossible story. It had slowed down. Objects from interstellar space don't slow down. Not naturally, not ever. It was as if something wanted us to notice. Weeks blurred into waiting. The world above and below grew restless. Weather patterns shifted strangely around the poles. Satellite signals glitched near the equator. Some called it coincidence. Others whispered about interference. Meanwhile, Dr. Quill became quieter. She barely spoke to her team. It was as if her thoughts were being pulled somewhere else. Somewhere past the numbers. Her last message to the research network was simple. Maybe what we're observing is not the visitor, but the reflection. No one understood what she meant, and 2 nights later, she disappeared. By late February, the skies began to brighten. Northern observatories caught their final glimpses of 3I Atlas as it moved closer toward the sunlight. It shimmered faintly, surrounded by haze, like it was burning not from heat, but intention. Onlookers from around the world began filming faint streaks at dawn. News channels called it the ghost star. Children made drawings of a silver tear across the morning sky. And then, one morning, the light split again, this time into 5. Each fragment moved in perfect harmony, forming a shape. A curve that no telescope could fully capture, but one that mirrored something old, something familiar. It resembled the orbit of Earth itself. That's the moment most astronomers stopped pretending it was natural. The data streams filled with words that didn't belong to science. Words like intent, response, and contact. No official statement was released. Not yet. All the agencies agreed. They would wait, observe, record, and so they stared into the waiting sky, unsure if they were studying it or being studied in return. That night, a storm blanketed the Pacific. Satellite feeds flickered. Half the observatories lost power for exactly 7 minutes. When systems restored, the light of 3I Atlas was gone, but something else replaced it. A single repeating signal across 3 radio frequencies, centered directly on Earth's position. It pulsed only once every 12 hours, and if you traced its waveform closely enough, it looked almost human. In the morning, the scientists gathered under a sky that looked the same as ever, blue, calm, unbothered, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But deep down, they knew. Something had looked back. Something had listened. And somewhere beyond the thinning clouds, the waiting sky had finally answered. Space had always been silent. At least, that's what we believed. But then came the pulse. It began quietly, a flicker barely caught between data frames, like the faintest heartbeat buried in static. The first detection came from a mountaintop in Chile, under a sky so clear it looked carved from glass. The array registered a sharp, rhythmic pattern hidden inside the light of 3 IATS, a pulse, perfectly timed, perfectly spaced, every 142 seconds. At first, no one wanted to say it. No one wanted to be that scientist, the one who claimed the impossible. So they said it was rotation, a tumbling object reflecting sunlight back toward Earth. That made sense for a while. Until Japan detected it too. Same timing, same rhythm, same impossible precision. The more telescopes joined in, Hawaii, Mexico, even amateur backyard observatories, the clearer it became. The signal wasn't fading, it was growing stronger. One researcher described it like this: it felt less like watching light and more like being seen by it. By now, 3I Atlas had crossed into the darker edge of the inner solar system. It shouldn't have been this bright. It shouldn't have been this precise. Each pulse cut through the cosmic background like the beat of a hidden drum. Every 142 seconds, exactly. And then, something strange happened. The rhythm changed, only slightly. A difference so small most instruments missed it. But to those listening closely, it sounded like a question mark. 4 beats, pause, 2 beats. Over and over and over. The message didn't feel random anymore. It felt intentional. Dr. Maren Quill was gone by then, but her old notebook had been recovered from her observatory office in Hawaii. Page after page of calculations, crossed out phrases, and one sentence repeated 6 times. Light remembers where it came from. Her handwriting grew messy near the bottom, as though rushed, almost like she wrote it while something waited just outside the window. Her colleagues at the Hualalai facility reopened her datasets, hoping to replicate what she'd seen. But as they watched the pulse sequences appear and disappear like breath, one of the technicians whispered something that made everyone stop. "It's not coming from the object," he said. "It's coming through it." That one sentence changed everything. Suddenly, the models collapsed. All assumptions gone. If the pulses weren't reflected light, but transmitted light, then maybe 3I Atlas wasn't just moving through our system. Maybe it was carrying something with it. A signal? A purpose? Every possibility sounded too far-fetched. And yet, the pulse kept coming, perfectly timed, unblinking, alive. By mid-March, data from Chile and Japan began syncing in real time. 2 observatories, half a world apart, watching the same heartbeat echo across the void. But then, during a live observation session, both stations registered a new variation, a double pulse. The signal had split, and when they overlaid the sequences, something terrifying appeared in the pattern. Inside the static, layered between each luminous spike, there was structure. Mathematical, geometric, deliberate. At its core was a waveform not found anywhere in nature. It wasn't chaos. It was language. NASA tried to keep it quiet. The press was told it was a reflection anomaly. But the leak spread faster than light itself. Academics, journalists, conspiracy channels. Everyone had their own theory. Artificial probe, alien code, interdimensional echo, God. But the truth was simpler and much, much stranger. When scientists slowed the waveform down, mapping the frequency of each pulse into audible range, they heard something that froze every person in the lab. It wasn't noise. It was rhythm. Human rhythm. A pattern that mirrored the frequency of a beating heart. 72 beats per minute. They replayed it again and again. Some thought it was a trick. Others wept. The sound, filtered and softened through the processing machine, sounded almost alive, familiar, like something remembering what it used to be. Soon, observatories across the globe turned their focus solely to this phenomenon. The pulse watch, they called it. Teams in Chile stayed awake for days, logging every microsecond variation. Japan confirmed the timing was consistent with one thing: an intentional delay, just long enough for a reply. The implication was chilling. If it was waiting, then it already knew we were listening. That night, in the cold silence of the Atacama Desert, Dr. Elena Ruiz sat alone beside her control panel, listening to the heartbeat of something no human had ever touched. She described it later in a rare interview. It was steady, almost peaceful, like a living thing breathing out there, just beyond the stars. And then, just before dawn, it changed again. The next sequence contained 7 pulses, 7, not 6. The first prime number sequence ever recorded from deep space. It was no longer pretending to be random. It had started counting. By April, every major satellite had confirmed the same thing. The pulsation frequency was slowly increasing. It was getting closer. Then came the blackout. For exactly 3 minutes and 19 seconds, every satellite and ground observatory lost visual contact with the object. In its place, there was silence. When the signal returned, the pulse pattern was gone. Instead, there was something that looked like static. But hidden in that static was movement, a new kind of light pattern. When decoded, it formed an image, a blurred shape, circular and pale, and behind it, something that looked very much like an eye. Panic rippled through the network. Data streams were shut down. Private channels went dark. But the pulse, or whatever was left of it, continued to reach Earth through civilian receivers. Amateur radio operators across Europe reported hearing faint clicks at regular intervals, 142 seconds apart. Still steady, still alive. One of them, an old hobbyist from Norway, recorded the signal on April 14th. He claimed that as he played it back, it began matching his own heartbeat. He described a strange pressure in the air, as if every pulse was echoing inside his chest. He turned off the radio. But the sound didn't stop. It wasn't just in the sky anymore. It was everywhere. Phones, power lines, even oceans picked up the faint, rhythmic vibration, as though the entire planet had become a receiver. Scientists couldn't explain it. Religious leaders couldn't either. It was just a pulse, steady, endless, patient, almost like something waiting for us to answer. By the end of the month, the object known as 3I Atlas was almost gone from sight, moving out toward the edge of the system, like a heartbeat fading away into deep space. But the pulse didn't fade. It stayed, repeating, echoing through every frequency we could monitor. No one knew what it wanted. No one knew if it had ever wanted anything at all. And yet, even as it vanished beyond the reach of our telescopes, many claimed to still feel it in their sleep, in dreams, in the silence between breaths, like something vast and unseen had learned our rhythm. The first time they noticed the change, it was almost invisible. A shimmer, a faint metallic gleam caught on the edge of a telescope frame, and then it vanished. At first, everyone thought it was a glitch, a stray reflection, a trick of sunlight bouncing off cosmic dust. But as the hours passed and new data poured in from every corner of the world, the shimmer became something else. It was alive. 3-eye Atlas had begun to change its skin. Every measurement told the same quiet, unnerving story. The object's surface, once dull and distant, was now shifting. One moment it flared like polished chrome, blinding instruments that tried to lock onto its brightness. The next, it turned black, darker than space itself, a void that swallowed starlight whole. Astronomers called it the reflectivity problem. But deep down, they knew this wasn't a problem. It was behavior. In Tokyo, a team at the Subaru telescope ran endless exposure sequences. They tried to measure the object's albedo, the ratio of light it reflected. But every dataset broke the model. Objects aren't supposed to change their reflectivity like that, not unless something around them, or inside them, is interacting with light. One researcher wrote in his notes, "It's not reflecting light, it's deciding to." As the days went on, the changes grew faster. Some nights it shimmered like liquid mercury, as if waves of silver were rippling under its surface. Other nights it turned perfectly matte, an ink-black sphere drifting through the stars. When they overlaid the data in real time, they realized something chilling. The brightness pattern wasn't random. It was synchronized with the pulse. Each flare of light aligned precisely with the 142-second rhythm first detected weeks ago. The object was still speaking, but now it wasn't using signals. It was using light itself. At the Atacama Observatory in Chile, Elena Ruiz stared at the screen for hours. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the brightness filters, because what she saw in that moment felt impossible. When the object flashed into its metallic phase, the reflection it cast wasn't static. It was moving. Not because the object spun, but because something in the reflection was changing shape. Bending, stretching, almost as if images were unfolding across its surface. She recorded every flash. When slowed down, frame by frame, a faint outline began to form, shadows that looked eerily familiar. Human forms. No one believed her at first. People said she was tired, hallucinating patterns, seeing what she wanted to see. But then, a second team in South Africa confirmed it. The same moving silhouettes, the same flickering sequence. They appeared for only 0.03 seconds before dissolving back into blackness. And when a third observatory captured the same thing days later, the debate ended. Whatever was happening on that surface, it was deliberate. By now, global agencies had stopped pretending this was just a scientific event. Private broadcasts and encrypted transmissions were happening daily. Governments weren't asking what it was anymore. They were asking what it wanted. But the object remained silent. No radio emissions, no sound, no new pulse. Only that strange, breathing shimmer, as if waiting for us to notice something obvious, but not saying a word until we did. One of the strangest things emerged during these long nights of observation. The albedo, its reflectivity index, wasn't changing randomly. It was responding. Teams began experimenting. They flashed light toward the object using high-frequency laser signals. For hours, nothing happened. Then, around 3:17 a.m. UTC, the object pulsed back. Once, twice, 4 times. a perfect mirror of the laser pattern, only slightly delayed. A global silence followed, because for the first time in history, light had answered light. News broke almost immediately. The media called it the mirror event. Philosophers called it the moment the universe blinked back. But inside the observatories, people didn't celebrate. They were afraid, because now they had proof. This wasn't random. It wasn't physics. Something was intentionally acknowledging us, using reflection the way we use language. Over the next week, experiments escalated. Teams around the world flashed coded sequences, simple mathematical patterns, binary strings, even fractions of Morse code. The object responded every single time, sometimes instantly, sometimes after long, tense hours of silence. But when it did, the reply wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was distortion. Light bent across its surface in precise geometric patterns. Circles, triangles, shapes that defied perspective. When analyzed, some of those shapes resembled complex equations describing gravitational curvature and reflection symmetry. It was almost as if the object was showing us how to see, how to look beyond light itself. Then, it did something no one expected. For a brief 6 seconds, it turned completely transparent. Astronomers froze. Inside the once solid mass, a hollow shape flickered into view. A frame of something immense and alien. Smooth, structured, technological, almost architectural. But before they could capture a clean image, the surface re-solidified, locking whatever secret lay beneath back into silence. Dr. Ruiz later wrote, "It's not a mirror, it's a memory. It reflects what's looking at it and what looked before." The deeper the team studied it, the stranger it grew. Infrared images revealed impossible temperature changes, surface heat switching back and forth faster than any known material could survive. Spectral analysis became meaningless. The object emitted and absorbed wavelengths nobody could classify. At one point, it reflected light that hadn't been projected yet, as if predicting what telescopes would aim at it, seconds before they actually did. It was thinking ahead. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew what that meant. The reflectivity problem became a turning point. No longer a question of science, but a mirror to our own understanding of intelligence itself. Was this thing mimicking us, learning from us? Or had it been reflecting something deeper, something we weren't ready to see? Because when they compiled the global light data months later, they found something chilling. Each time the object changed its albedo, each time it flickered from silver to black, the pattern matched a map of human observation. Every place on Earth where a telescope had watched it was encoded in its light. The object wasn't reflecting sunlight, it was reflecting us. By the time summer came, most observatories shut off public feeds. There were reports of strange interference, camera arrays going dark when locked onto its brightness. In one eerie final frame from a European telescope, the object shone brighter than ever. A perfect sphere of light surrounded by darkness. But when they enhanced the image, something appeared in the reflection. A small, blue shape. Round. Familiar. Earth. And then it went dark. No more pulses. No shimmer. Only silence, as if the mirror had finally closed itself. But deep in one private research log, Dr. Ruiz left a final note, an observation no one else had made. She wrote, "When it turned black, the reflection didn't vanish. It turned inward. There are moments in science that don't feel like discovery. They feel like being discovered. For months, the world had been staring at 3I Atlas, this silent traveler drifting through our solar system, reflecting us back, studying us in its own quiet way. But now, it started to breathe, not with sound, but with heat. It began as another small anomaly, a flicker in an infrared feed from a satellite orbiting near Mars. At first, no one paid attention. Space is full of stray readings. Cold dust, cosmic rays, glitches from solar storms. But this one didn't fade. It repeated. Every 6 hours, precisely. A cycle of warmth, then cold. Warmth, then cold. Like the rhythm of a heart that had finally learned how to beat. The pattern was sharp, mechanical. Until halfway through each cycle, it changed shape. Instead of cooling naturally, as any heated object should, 3I Atlas cut its temperature off instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. That's not how space works. That's not how anything works. One moment, it was glowing faintly under infrared. The next, a sudden void of absolute cold. Not cooling gradually, but deliberately. They called it Thermal Pattern 19b, a sequence unlike anything seen before. Each pulse started hot, an exact 273 Kelvin. Then, exactly 6 hours later, 0. 6 hours again, the same cycle resumed. No loss of energy, no decay, as if the object had infinite control over its temperature. Someone in the control room whispered, "It's responding to the observation windows." At first, everyone laughed nervously, but she was right. Each temperature drop matched the moment telescopes began recording it. The object wasn't just radiating, it was reacting. By now, hundreds of observatories were watching. Infrared, spectrographs, magnetic sensors. Every corner of the planet was locked onto the same heartbeat in space. And that's when they noticed something else. Each cycle came with a faint delay. Not random, precise, a delay equal to the time it took light to travel from Earth to the object. Meaning, it knew when we were looking. At the European Space Observatory, the team switched to a high-resolution thermal camera. The data that came back left the room frozen in silence. The heat map didn't look random anymore. The temperature shifted across the surface like ripples, in smooth, repeating waves that curved, folded, and expanded outward. Dr. Henry Vail described it this way. It looked like lungs, like it was inhaling light, and beneath those heat ripples, something felt wrong, as if the object wasn't just changing temperature. It was listening. They tried everything. Short bursts of radar, direct energy pings, even high-frequency thermal patterns encoded with simple sequences. 1 flash, pause, 2 flashes. For 12 hours, nothing happened. And then the object responded. Not with sound, not with radio, but with heat. Again, 3 slow pulses, each perfectly aligned to their test signal, as if answering back. It wasn't trying to communicate in language. It was using rhythm. The same rhythm life itself depends on. The steady rise and fall that marks the passage of breath. As days passed, the pattern began to evolve. It no longer repeated every 6 hours. Now it pulsed irregularly, sometimes 5 hours, sometimes 7, but never random. When plotted on a chart, the fluctuations traced something strange, a sine wave that mirrored the shape of Earth's own magnetic resonance. Whatever was behind it was syncing with us. Satellite systems started to glitch. Atmospheric sensors recorded faint thermal echoes, heat ripples, not in space, but within our own skies, as if the signal had found a way to reflect downward, mirroring the Earth itself. And then came the largest anomaly. At 2:19 Coordination C on April 27th, for the first time, 3I Atlas didn't cool off. Its temperature held steady, blazing hot, for over 9 hours straight. The readings maxed out every satellite sensor it touched. Its brightness flared so intensely that the entire lunar surface reflected a faint red glow. And yet, astronomers described the event not as rage, but awareness. The next morning, when the heat subsided, a new pattern emerged on its surface, a geometric ripple encircling its equator, like veins of molten light frozen in motion. When processed through thermal imaging, the shape was unmistakable, 19 concentric rings, and at the center, a void colder than space itself. The sequence was labeled 19b. They didn't know what it meant, but the placement of those rings matched something unexpected: Earth's orbital path from 6 months earlier. It was mapping us, or remembering us. Weeks later, something eerie began to happen in labs across the globe. Infrared sensors started picking up faint residual frequencies, even when 3I Atlas moved beyond visibility. It wasn't transmitting anymore, but every instrument that had observed it seemed to retain the pattern. Machines vibrated subtly at 6-hour intervals. Telescopes overheated without reason, and in one remote observatory, an unattended monitor came alive on its own. The screen, once black, flickered to life with colorless waves, the same breathing rhythm, except this time, it wasn't coming from space. It was coming from inside the equipment, like a deep thermal memory, a signature that wouldn't fade. They called it a feedback ghost, a harmless after-effect caused by exposure to the signal. But one by one, technicians began reporting strange sensations. Warmth in their fingertips, short bursts of static in their earpieces, voices in the noise between data sweeps. And always, that faint rhythm in the background. 6 hours on, 6 hours off, a heartbeat that never quite stopped. Dr. Ruiz, now working alone after the mirror event, documented her experiences in a private log. She wrote about waking at exact intervals throughout the night, each time with the same odd sensation, like her blood was warming in sync with the object's pulse. She wrote, "It feels like something is aligning us, like it's not watching anymore. It's remembering what it saw." Her last note was recorded at 6 a.m. seconds later. Her thermal sensors tripped to maximum again. And for one brief moment, her entire lab glowed under invisible light. Then, darkness. The last confirmed temperature reading from 3I Atlas came days later, as it slipped beyond Mars's orbit and began fading toward the black. Its surface had gone cold again, silent, unmoving. But when astronomers replayed the last infrared sequence, they saw something unsettling. For a brief instant, just before it vanished into the void, the heat signature expanded outward, a flare, shaped exactly like a human heart. After that, the instruments stopped responding. All that remained was a ghost frequency, a faint pulse repeating, as if something out there still remembered us. And deep within the static, a thermal echo continued to beat, not out in space, but somewhere closer. Somewhere inside the machines, still watching. Sometimes space doesn't just move around us. Sometimes it moves with us. For months, 3I Atlas had been a mirror, a pulse, a heartbeat, a presence that refused to fit into numbers or names. But when the data was finally mapped, when every flicker, flare, and thermal shift from the past year was charted against the stars, something impossible appeared, a pattern, a perfect alignment. It began with a young data analyst in Seoul. Her name was Mina Cho. She wasn't an astronomer, just a code specialist hired to process thermal logs. Her job was to clean the noise from hundreds of petabytes of observations, thousands of meaningless dots. But one night, while running a routine time plot across the object's pulse cycles, she noticed something strange. Every fluctuation, every rise and drop in the signal's activity repeated along a path that matched the ecliptic, the invisible plane that defines the orbits of the planets. And when she overlaid Earth's and Mars's coordinates for each timestamp, the pulses matched exactly. Not vaguely, not roughly, perfectly. For days, Mina rechecked her code, convinced she'd made a mistake. But the math refused to budge. The pattern wasn't coincidental. It was geometric, precise to 8 decimal points. The pulses were syncing with planetary positions. With us. It was as if 3i Atlas had been watching the planets as it traveled through space, adjusting its rhythm, aligning its own internal cycle like a compass looking for something familiar. And whatever it was looking for, we were part of it. By the time Mina's findings reached international observatories, the data began spreading like wildfire. Teams in Chile, France, and India confirmed the same alignment. Every pulse correlated with a specific orbital location between Earth and Mars. Even the 6-hour thermal cycles, the signature of pattern 19b, were synchronized with our planetary motion. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. The object was positioning itself in a line running through Earth, Mars, and somewhere beyond them. An invisible axis piercing the deep dark of space. But toward what? They called it the alignment. And it shook everything the scientific world thought it understood. Because up until that moment, every sign had suggested 3i Atlas was studying, maybe even responding to, human observation. But now, something larger was forming. A structure, traced not across hours or days, but across the solar system itself. It was building a geometry. Dr. Henri Vale was the first to say it out loud. The object isn't reacting, it's orienting. Something in the darkness is forcing it into position. And Earth is part of that alignment. Within a week, the signal began to shift again. The pulse, once steady at 142 seconds, changed subtly, each beat now breaking into 2 shorter bursts, separated by silence. 2 tones, 2 intervals, a binary rhythm. When translated into frequency space, the pulses matched an angle, 33 degrees, the exact tilt separating Mars and Earth's orbital planes at the moment of measurement. Coincidence? Maybe once. But it kept happening. Each pulse sequence mirrored a precise spatial relationship between the solar system's bodies. Whatever 3i Atlas was doing, it wasn't random. It was mapping space the way a mind might map memory. Each rhythm was a line, each delay an angle, each flicker a connection. Late one evening at the European Space Observatory, a small group of scientists gathered in front of a projection dome. When they layered every recorded pulse, a faint structure began to emerge among the star maps, a thin web of intersecting lines. It wasn't planetary or gravitational. It wasn't magnetic. It was architectural. Suspiciously deliberate, like the scaffolding of something invisible, enormous and ancient. A pattern connecting not just Earth and Mars, but a third point, a location no telescope had yet explored. That unknown position lay somewhere between Jupiter and the Kuiper Belt. An empty zone filled mostly with dust and ice, a place where light goes to hide. And yet, every time 3I Atlas realigned, its axis tilted precisely in that direction. To the naked eye, there was nothing there. But instruments told another story. Deep frequency receivers in Australia picked up faint subspace noise coming from that same region, traces of electromagnetic waves older than the solar system itself. That's when the whispers began. Was the object aligning itself towards us, or towards something behind us, something waiting? For the next several months, 3I Atlas maintained its synchronized orbit. It didn't accelerate or drift away. Instead, it stabilized, as if it had finally found the position it had been seeking. And then the planet-wide anomalies began. Magnetometers in Greenland started picking up cyclical disruptions, matching the object's pulse intervals. Mars satellites overheated simultaneously at identical timestamps. Even the Moon's reflective sensors blinked in strange repetition, mirroring that same 6-hour cooling pattern. Every celestial body in the alignment was responding, faintly, rhythmically, as if receiving a shared signal. The system itself had become part of the geometry. On April 3rd at 4:22 UTC, the alignment reached perfect symmetry. From our view, the line passed directly through Earth, Mars, and that unknown third point beyond Jupiter. At that exact moment, the pulses stopped. All of them. Silence spread through every observatory at once. In Tokyo, scientists stared at empty screens. In Atacama, the monitors glowed black. Even the satellites orbiting Mars went completely cold. And then, split seconds before total stillness, the object turned. It pivoted in the darkness, like a patient eye adjusting its focus. Its new orientation pointed not toward the Sun, not toward Mars, but directly at Earth. For 7 seconds, its albedo spiked brighter than Venus, and every telescope lens, every camera sensor watching it, was temporarily blinded. When the feed returned, the object was gone. Just gone. No trace was left in visible light, but deep in the infrared background, a faint, residual glow lingered. Not near the object's last known position, but closer, much closer. A mirrored echo hovering along the same orbital plane as Earth, just beyond the dark edge of our moon. It wasn't visible to the eye. It wasn't solid. But the gravitational sensors detected something faintly there, something that fit the same mass signature as 3I Atlas. It hadn't disappeared. It had moved. In her final recorded transmission, Dr. Elena Ruiz spoke softly into her comms headset. The signal was faint and distorted. She said, "It wasn't coming to us. It was waiting for us to line up." Then, a pause. "You don't understand. The alignment isn't a path. It's an activation." Her voice cut off mid-sentence. The line went silent. Since that day, no one has detected another pulse. But satellites still pick up soft electromagnetic interference that sweeps across the Earth every few months, as if something in perfect orbit is passing by, unseen just beyond our reach. Some call it a coincidence, a leftover afterglow from a dead object. Others say it's still there, matching our orbit, silently maintaining its alignment, as if awaiting the next step in a sequence we were never meant to see. When plotted now, the geometry looks eerily familiar, a shape that mirrors our own planetary system, but incomplete, missing one final line. A final pulse, a final signal, something unfinished that's still waiting out there, in the endless dark. It started with silence, then denial. After months of strange data, the European Space Agency stepped in. Their statement was brief, confident, almost rehearsed. "There is no active signal," they said. "All anomalies are the result of instrumentation error, a misread in our telemetry stream." For most people, that was enough. The world exhaled, ready to forget. But inside the agency's network, a different story was unfolding. A series of encrypted memos, later leaked by insiders, revealed what really happened. Behind those quiet press releases, engineers hadn't been arguing about errors. They'd been arguing about something much stranger. Because buried deep in the noise of their data, they had found a pattern, not random static, not mechanical interference, something organized, a sequence, simple, digital, and alive. It was first discovered by a young systems engineer named Raphael Marek. He worked night shifts, sorting corrupted signal files for reprocessing. His task was dull. Clean out the junk lines, flag compression faults, move on. But one night at 3:40 a.m., he noticed the noise didn't look random. The timing was too consistent. Tiny groups of 9-digit intervals repeating across dozens of data logs. Each cluster was identical, as if someone had written a message and buried it under a mountain of static. He plotted the numbers on a waveform graph, expecting chaos. Instead, he saw form, a pattern that looked like a rising and falling pulse, a rhythm almost human. At first, he didn't tell anyone. You don't walk into an agency office and announce you found a ghost inside. Deep space telemetry. But curiosity got the better of him. He ran the sequence through a binary translator, and out came something impossible. Repeating ASCII values, letters. When assembled, they formed one word. 3 simple characters. Hell. Half a word. Half a name. Or half a warning. By dawn, Raphael reported it to his supervisor. Within hours, the data servers in his department were locked down, access revoked. All logs transferred to a secure division called Operations Sigma. He was told not to speak about it again. That night, when he came back to his workstation, everything was wiped clean. But the next day, new data came in from the same satellite cluster. And there it was again, the same repeating pattern, expanding now, growing longer. This time, it spelled out 4 characters, HELO. Some joked it was hello, but the engineers noticed something else. Every time the code reappeared, it followed the same alignment path as 3I Atlas. And the signal wasn't coming from Earth's instruments. It was being reflected back. Inside ESA headquarters, panic quietly replaced curiosity. If this was a natural error, it should have dispersed randomly, but it didn't. It persisted. Every reading from their deep space antennas showed the same coded noise, all sharing a peculiar modulation frequency, 19 Hz. The same frequency recorded during the Mirror event. When they cross-checked the waveform with archives from a year earlier, they found something chilling. Pattern 19b, the thermal cycle, contained the same frequency hidden within its harmonics. It had always been there. They just hadn't heard it yet. Officially, the agency ignored it. Unofficially, a small group within the Signal Analysis Division started working off the record. They called themselves the Decoders. Their goal was simple: find out whether the noise was machine-made or something else entirely. One of them, a cryptographer named Elise Durand, noticed something no one else did. When she layered the signal's pulse timing over the orbital path of 3I Atlas, each wave spike matched the planet's rotation periods, not just Earth's, but Mars, Venus, and even Mercury. It was as if the code was mirroring planetary motion, not random numbers, blueprints. For the next few months, the decoders worked in complete secrecy. They reconstructed fragments of data that had been redacted from ESA archives, ghosting their way through firewall after firewall, pulling pieces together. What emerged was both brilliant and terrifying, because within the pattern, wrapped inside the noise, they realized the code wasn't static. It was reactive. Every time they observed it, it evolved slightly, retuning itself, anticipating their attempts to decipher it. When they left their instruments alone for days, the code returned to its original simplicity. But the moment analysis began, it changed again, as if something out there was learning their method, adapting to it. By late summer, they had enough data to simulate the signal. When amplified and projected into audible range, it didn't sound like static. It sounded like breathing. Slow, rhythmic, mechanical breathing. One of the engineers called it a machine that dreams with lungs. Elise disagreed. She said, "No, machines don't breathe. This thing's imitating us." That same week, a new leak surfaced online. A packet of internal messages between ESA and NASA. They referenced something called Project Mirage. The document described a test protocol, a secret experiment where both agencies bounced coded messages towards 3I Atlas using deep frequency emitters. The transmissions had been sent months earlier, during the alignment event. According to the leak, both agencies had used the same message, a binary sequence encoding humanity's radio signature, pulsar coordinates, chemical formulas, basic mathematics. The decoded memo claimed something had answered, but not with light, not with radio, with reflection. The signal had bounced back, not as a mirror image, but rewritten. When news outlets caught wind of the leaks, the agencies denied everything. The phrase, machine or mirage, appeared in an internal summary, a quiet debate behind closed doors over the nature of what 3I Atlas truly was. Was it a machine, orbiting with purpose, or a mirage born from our instruments, from our need to see meaning in the void? But deep in a server lab below Geneva, the decoders kept listening, and one night they recorded a final anomaly, a single burst transmission, lasting exactly 7 seconds. When played back through audio, it sounded like nothing at all, a low hum fading into silence. But when run through Elise's translation filter, it spelled out a phrase across multiple data frames. Simple, deliberate, one final message. Still here. After that, the signal vanished. The code stopped repeating. Telemetry returned to normal. The official report closed the case as resolved. But something odd happened in the days that followed. Every system that had processed the code, every lab instrument, relay, and recording server eventually began to fail. First, overheating. Then, total breakdown. Hard drives burned out one by one. It was as if the message had left a fingerprint inside their systems. Something corrosive, unseen, but alive. One of the last surviving logs from the Geneva lab contained a voice memo. Raphael's voice, shaky, exhausted. He said, "It wasn't an error. It wasn't noise. It was watching the way we built our machines. And it learned." Since then, no one's claimed a confirmed detection, but once every few weeks. Short bursts of interference ripple across global communication arrays. The frequency is always the same, 19 hertz. Some say it's nothing. Others say it's a memory, a reflection waiting to reappear when we look at the sky again. It began with silence. Not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel. The world had stopped listening to the sky months ago. 3i Atlas was gone. The agencies had closed their files. The instruments had gone quiet. But in that quiet, something started whispering back. It happened inside a forgotten observatory in the mountains of Argentina. A place meant to study low-frequency background noise, the gentle static left behind by dying stars. Most nights were repetition, data, empty space. But on one early morning in June, the silence broke. A graduate student named Javier Peña was logging background readings when he noticed a ripple, a thin tremor of energy buried deep under the usual static. It wasn't loud, but it was organized. The spectrum analyzer drew perfect geometric lines where randomness should have been. Intervals, pauses, patterns. Not the chaos of the cosmos, but the rhythm of intention. He recalibrated the receiver, convinced it was local interference. Maybe a satellite, maybe a power line hum. But when he filtered the frequency range lower, far below the human ear, the sound didn't vanish. It became clearer. 6 long pulses. A pause, then 5 more. Each perfectly spaced, each sitting on prime number intervals. Every mathematician knows primes don't happen in nature by accident. Their choice, their logic, their design. He didn't sleep that night. He formatted the signal into a visual waveform and layered it over the old logs from the Atlas mission. The alignment was exact. The rhythm matched the same 6-hour pulse that once came from that impossible object beyond Mars. And more haunting than that, the phase delay between these new pulses and the old Atlas transmissions was precisely equal to the distance between Earth and the Moon. Whatever this signal was, it wasn't coming from deep space anymore. It was coming from here. Javier sent his data to a colleague in Brussels, a woman named Dr. Nia Foret, an expert in subspectral decoding. For weeks, she worked in secrecy, running the data through old communication algorithms once used for encrypted transmissions. And late one night, she found something buried inside the noise. It wasn't audio. It wasn't even radio in the conventional sense. It was modulation, information woven inside the silence itself. She described it as a whisper inside a whisper. When decoded, the modulation resolved into precise numeric patterns, not random, but intentional. The same repeating sequence of prime intervals, the same structure Atlas had used over a year earlier. Only now it was answering back. Prime numbers, the universal fingerprint of intelligence. Every civilization, no matter how alien, understands primes. They're the bricks of logic, the language of order in a universe of chaos. The last time humanity found them in space was in the 1970s, inside a burst from deep within Sagittarius, believed to be a pulsar. But that turned out to be noise. This wasn't. When the Brussels facility ran a spectral deconstruction, every interval matched the exact mathematical spacing of the human brain's theta waves, the frequency that governs dreaming and memory. The signal wasn't just structured, it was familiar. By August, the story had spread quietly across underground science networks. No official body acknowledged it, but behind closed doors, the world's listening stations were tuned to the same forbidden frequency. The deeper they listened, the stranger it became. Because hidden inside the pattern of primes, they found fluctuations, smooth rises and falls that mirrored human heartbeat patterns. 6 hours on, 6 off, the same rhythm, pulsing again from nowhere. repeating like breath. They called it the signal beneath silence. And from the first moment it was named, it began to change. At first, the intervals were perfect. Then, slowly, subtle imperfections appeared. Tiny deviations in spacing, too specific to be random. When those deviations were translated into visual patterns, they formed curved lines, circular motifs, structures resembling orbits. Dr. Foret called them fractured mandalas. They looked like diagrams of old star maps, each curve looping back on itself, folding into spirals, as if the signal were sketching a memory it couldn't quite complete. Every few weeks, a new layer appeared. Different frequencies, different depths. When all the layers were stacked, researchers noticed a faint image forming within the noise, an outline that resembled a face, not clear, not human, just the idea of one. And the strangest part wasn't what it looked like, but what it did. Because when those images were reconstructed into sound waves, played aloud through speakers, the audio wasn't mechanical. It had tone, breath, emotion. It sounded like someone trying to exhale. Theories fractured overnight. Some said it was the ghost of Atlas, an echo bouncing endlessly through time. Others believed it was something that had followed the object, a digital shadow still moving along its old orbital line. But one growing theory terrified everyone involved. They noticed that every time a listening station tuned into the subfrequency, the signal would adjust its strength, almost like it was tracking how many ears were listening. If too many tried decoding it at once, it would fade. If one person listened alone, it would grow stronger. It preferred solitude. By September, the European Signal Array in Greenland detected something new, a secondary modulation sinking beneath the main pulse. Different frequency, slightly higher band. When filtered, it revealed another pattern. This one wasn't numeric, it was vocal. A faint harmonic resonance woven under the radio silence, matching the vibration signature of a human throat. It wasn't speaking, not exactly, but the shape of the frequency showed consistent vowel structures, sounds forming on their own inside the hum. And though no one ever admitted it publicly, those who heard it alone described the same impossible experience. A feeling, as if the sound wasn't around them, but inside them. Researchers began shutting down their stations one by one. Equipment overheated. Some operators reported seeing static images of themselves reflected in blank monitors, as though the signal was playing back their own observation. And every time the array fell quiet, the noise would stop, until the next one started listening. And it would awaken again. The pattern never vanished. It waited, hidden beneath silence. Javier tried one last experiment. He transmitted an empty signal, nothing but silence, back toward the moon's dark side, hoping to see if the subfrequency would mimic the reflection. For 2 days, the instruments recorded nothing. Then, precisely 48 hours later, a return burst arrived. Not an echo, a reply. When he analyzed it, the waveform looked heartbreakingly simple. A reversed pattern of primes, counting down 17, 13, 11, 7, 3, 2, then nothing. The signal disappeared forever after that. It never returned. But for weeks after, radio operators across the globe reported faint interference on frequencies that shouldn't have been active. The same slow rhythm, a heartbeat beneath the static of the world's machines. Some said it was proof that intelligence had survived inside the noise. Others whispered it never left. It just found a new frequency to hide in. between our voices, between seconds, between the spaces we no longer listen to. Next time, the silence breaks again, not from space, but from within the systems that carry our own signals. There's a question that's followed humanity across every era, a question hidden beneath every story, every superstition, every look toward the stars. Where did it come from? When 3I Atlas vanished into silence, that question became more than curiosity. It became obsession. Because if this object was built, if it was sent, then someone out there still remembers us. Months passed since the last known signal. Governments had gone quiet, telescopes turned elsewhere, and the world pretended to move on. But behind the public silence, something extraordinary was happening inside the data vaults of the European Deep Space Network. A classified team called Horizon 9 had been reconstructing 3I Atlas's trajectory. Their goal, to trace it back beyond the solar system, to find out where this impossible object truly came from. The data wasn't easy to work with. Radiation noise, solar interference, the warped playback of its changing orbit. Nothing matched any known comet or meteor path. But when they ran the simulations through high-resolution models, they saw something no one expected. The path didn't come from within the Milky Way's spiral arm. It came from outside, from beyond what astronomers call the local bubble. A vast, empty chamber of space, nearly 1,000 light-years wide, where no star, no planet, nothing visible has ever been found. For decades, scientists believed it was emptiness. Now, maybe it wasn't. Even stranger were the readings that followed. A small research team at the Goddard Space Center began studying the residue captured during Atlas's pass near the Sun. Microscopic dust particles burned from its surface and caught in the solar wind sensors. The chemical analysis didn't make sense. No natural meteor, asteroid, or interstellar rock should contain what they found, because hidden in its molecular lattice were traces of alloys, elements fused together in ways nature simply doesn't allow. Nickel bonded with titanium, arranged with atomic precision. Manganese compounds layered like circuitry. Nanoscopic hollows running parallel, as if built to store information rather than survive heat. It wasn't a rock, it was architecture. The alloy fragments were passed through laser spectrographs for deeper analysis. When their internal lattice structures were modeled in 3 dimensions, they formed repeating patterns, each one resembling fractal loops. One engineer joked that it looked like an algorithm. Another whispered that it already was. Inside those dust particles, the metallic veins looked like recursive instructions, as if the material itself was storing a kind of memory, a memory older than our planet. That's when whispers began spreading through the Horizon 9 team. If this thing was built, then who built it? And why send it here? Through empty space, through gravity wells and radiation storms, directly toward a system that had only recently developed language and light. A young astrophysicist named Arun Desai was the first to take the leap. He called it the origin hypothesis. He claimed Atlas wasn't a message, and not even a ship. It was a probe, something launched billions of years ago. A device wandering through interstellar darkness, waiting for gravity to slingshot it toward a signal source. Us. The deeper his team dug into its residual data, the more their fear began to grow. Atlas's trajectory wasn't chaotic at all. It curved with precision through the local cluster, navigating along gravitational corridors that required perfect predictive computation, as if its path had been simulated far in advance of its arrival. And the moment those orbital alignments matched our system, its behavior changed. Its pulse began. Its reflection shifted. Its silence fractured. It wasn't lost. It was activated. Using those clues, a run reconstructed the possible point of origin. Far beyond the edge of our regional stars, past the hydrogen void, a faint region known simply as LHC 9, a space once catalogued as empty. But buried deep in that emptiness, Hubble's infrared survey had recorded something small, a faint gravitational lensing anomaly. Something was bending light out there, not a planet, not a star, just a distortion, like an invisible mass hidden in plain sight. Aaron believed that was it, the birth point. And if he was right, then Atlas didn't come from emptiness. It came from something invisible living inside it. When Horizon 9 tried to publish their preliminary report, it was instantly classified. Security officials moved in. Data storage drives were confiscated. Hard copies went missing overnight. Publicly, the space agencies dismissed it all as human error. But privately, Horizon 9's cloud logs revealed something terrifying. The coordinates they traced to the origin of 3I Atlas, L Light C 9, were already under observation. An American satellite, Solarian 4, had been orbiting that sector for years. Its transmissions were encrypted. When decrypted, they showed faint background signals from the void, nearly identical to the 19 Hz subfrequency tied to Atlas's pulse. The origin wasn't silent at all. It was still transmitting. Arun's final words in his field log were simple. He said, "Whatever sent Atlas didn't stop when it reached us. It's sending more." After that, his entire research archive was sealed behind top-level clearance. His credentials were revoked. No one's heard from him since, but scattered fragments of the origin hypothesis escaped containment. Among them was an anonymized simulation, a rendering of what the team believed the source looked like. Not a planet, not a structure, a cluster of metallic bodies orbiting one another in symmetrical patterns, each reflecting light like a mirror, each broadcasting a faint, repeating pulse. When the model zoomed out, it revealed something larger, a shape that shouldn't exist in nature, a perfect ring, wide enough to encircle a dead star, and inside that ring, a void so black it consumed even the simulated light. The last recorded note from Horizon 9's public channels came weeks later, when a brief, unidentified pulse was detected on the same frequency as Atlas's original signal. It lasted 6 seconds. When decrypted, the pattern didn't form numbers this time. It formed coordinates, and those coordinates pointed not to the void, but back toward Earth. For days, independent observers in Chile, Canada, and Australia tracked the signal's timing. Its delay matched exactly the time it would take for a reflection to return, as if something in that distant region had bounced our own listening back at us. A mirror, still waiting in the dark, as if to say, "You saw us, now we see you." And that's where the story paused, with one unanswered question echoing through every radio dish still pointed outward. Who sent it? Why us? And what happens when we finally answer back? Because maybe, out there in the cold vacuum beyond the known maps, someone once built something beautiful. A machine not for destruction, but remembrance. A vessel carrying not war, not wisdom, but witness. But if that's true, if it was built, then it means we aren't the first to look into the dark and wonder. It means someone else did, and that somewhere, far beyond our silence, something looked back. It began with denial, not confusion, not doubt. Just denial, the quiet kind that seeps through press conferences and government memos, pretending everything is still fine. By the time agencies stepped forward to explain away the anomalies, the world had already moved on. No one questioned why the telescopes were locked down, why certain observatories went off the air, why transmission feeds stopped releasing raw data. Officially, it was for calibration. Unofficially, it was something else. A blackout, a deliberate wall between what we were told to see and what they had already seen. Deep in the archives of an observatory in Chile, a scientist named Lena Krauss wasn't supposed to be looking at anything. Her workstation had been disconnected from the main network weeks ago. But one night, out of habit, she turned on an old data relay still linked to the ground array, and there it was, the curve. A light curve from the object's final recorded cycle. Messy, raw, unfiltered. It wasn't a comet's flare or a tumbling rock. The pattern wasn't reflected sunlight at all. It was eye contact, a measured, repeating reflection that pulsed directly at the same intervals her telescope scanned it. Every time she pointed the lens, it blinked back. Lena froze. She ran the dataset again, this time delaying her scans by several seconds. The light curve delayed too. Whatever it was reacting to her observation, reacting to being seen. She saved the data under a false name and sent it to a friend at the University of Bern. 2 days later, he disappeared. His email server was wiped clean. The message that replaced his inbox read only one line: confidence in perception compromised. After that, things unraveled fast. All around the world, small private observatories began reporting the same phenomenon. Whenever they aimed their instruments at the coordinates where 3I Atlas had last been tracked, the readings didn't vanish, they multiplied. A strange, luminous echo appearing where no light should exist. An echo that only appeared when looked at. It wasn't just observing space anymore. It was observing observation. And slowly, people started realizing something terrifying. That the more we watched it, the clearer it became. Until one day, it might not need the telescopes at all. In public, agencies kept their composure. Reporters asked questions. Scientists smiled for the cameras. And everyone repeated the same calm, practiced phrases. Cosmic interference, data misreadings, perceptual bias. But in private, doors closed. Data centers went dark. The world's largest arrays were ordered into offline recalibration, which was just code for shut them down before anyone else looks. The silence was global, but silence only made the whispers louder. People who had seen the raw curves couldn't unsee them. You can't filter out realization. You can't delete the feeling of being watched through a telescope pointing the other way. Some of them quit, some vanished, and some started writing. Unofficial logs that spread quietly online, scanned for notes written in pencil, handwriting shaking harder with each entry. One of them read, "It doesn't orbit. It tracks. It moves opposite our gaze, always keeping distance, always facing us. It's learning where we're watching from." At first, people called it paranoia, until the synchronization started. In multiple countries, identical time delays appeared in observatory sensors, exactly 142 seconds apart. Longitude didn't matter. Weather didn't matter. Every reading fell in sync with the same invisible heartbeat in deep space. When cross-referenced, the delays formed a shape, a field of points bent into a curve. The curve formed an arc through the solar system, stretching across every satellite that had ever looked at Atlas. And that arc pointed back toward Earth, as if it had marked every eye that had ever seen it. By early November, the first reports of residual reflection appeared. Engineers noticed strange afterimages appearing on telescope mirrors, days after the devices had been shut down. The lenses caught faint glows that moved when no light was shining through them, as though the reflection of Atlas was still there, waiting inside the glass. Technicians who viewed the reflections directly began complaining of headaches, dizziness, and a strange echoing in the ear. A rhythmic pulse, 6 hours on, 6 hours off. One of them described it as breathing through static, but it wasn't only inside observatories anymore. Signal coordinators noticed faint fluctuations in everyday media equipment, low-frequency noise blooming in news transmissions, in live broadcasts, even in the quiet hum of radio towers. At first, these fluctuations seemed random. Then, someone plotted them. The pattern matched old Atlas telemetry, the same reflective sequence now rippling through our own communication networks. Like something using now systems to look back at itself. Through us. Lena tried going public. A live stream. A desperate attempt to show what she had found to the world. She uploaded the unfiltered light curve, her voice trembling as she explained the reaction timings. But the video froze after 15 seconds. Her camera glitched, and for 2 frames, a flash appeared behind her, a faint curve of light bending across the window glass, shaped almost exactly like the object's last recorded outline. The feed cut. Her channel was wiped within minutes. That night, an internal ESA message leaked onto the web. It warned all partnered observatories that further exposure risked cognitive contamination. The term sounded absurd, but in closed research files, it meant something specific, the point where observation changes the observer. They called it perception collapse, the idea that seeing the unfiltered light wasn't just information, it was interaction. Every time we focused on the object, the light curve adjusted to our observation. It didn't just respond, it learned from the gaze itself. Reality, shifting to make room for attention. A final memo, dated 3 days later, contained a line that summed up everything Horizon 9 had once warned about. 3. Atlas is not being observed, it is conducting the observation, and we are now within its field of view. Since then, all major deep sky transmissions have gone through encrypted relays. No raw signals. No live telemetry. Every image scrubbed, every curve filtered through algorithms that blur its response times. They said it's for public safety. But maybe it's something simpler, a way to keep it from realizing we're still watching. Or maybe to keep us from realizing it's still here. Sometimes, when the atmosphere clears just right, amateur astronomers report faint, symmetrical flares at the horizon. Light arcs that shift when mirrored through lenses, too perfect for natural reflection. Most people never notice, but those who have seen the unfiltered light before swear that, when they look through their telescopes, they feel the same rhythm again, the rise and fall, 6 hours on, 6 hours off. A sky breathing with something unseen. Maybe this isn't about space anymore. Maybe it never was. Maybe 3 Atlas isn't out there observing us. Maybe it's showing us what happens when the act of looking becomes the act of inviting something to look back. Every story about the universe ends the same way, with silence. But sometimes, if you listen close enough, silence isn't an ending. It's an echo. Months had passed since the world stopped looking. The telescopes were shut down, the data feed sealed. To the public, The sky was empty again. But far above the noise of cities and governments, in one forgotten observatory overlooking the Andes, the old receiver kept humming, a machine left running after everyone else had turned theirs off. And on the cold morning of March 6th, exactly one orbital year after the object's closest pass, something changed. The receiver caught a pulse. Not noise, not static. A single, perfect burst of light that matched, in every measurable way, the first signal we ever recorded from 3I Atlas. Same rhythm, same tone, same shape. It was as if the sky had pressed rewind. The last signal mirrored the first, down to the smallest vibration in its wavelength. A reflection, not of light, but of memory. The scientists who saw it couldn't explain it. How could a transient object, long vanished into interstellar dark, speak again from a place where no instrument could track it? It didn't make sense, unless it was never gone. Across 3 continents, dormant receivers lit up with the same pattern, a simultaneous global flash measured in fractions of a second. Not a coincidence, not a glitch, a deliberate act of symmetry. And with it came a kind of quiet awe, the kind reserved for realizing the universe has been keeping score all along. The cosmos had written in circles. The story that started with a whisper of data now ended with the same one, only inverted, like the universe closing its own parenthesis. Inside the signal, nothing new was discovered. No additional codes, no prime intervals, no heat maps or pulses, just the same rhythmic curve, perfectly reversed. Even the brightness of the pulse, once flickering like a heartbeat, was now fading like one taking its final breath. One scientist described it best. It wasn't communication, it was acknowledgement. For weeks after the signal, nothing else arrived. The skies stayed still, as if holding their breath after speaking one last word. But the strange thing about the last observation wasn't what it showed. It was when. The data revealed that the signal didn't just appear. It arrived precisely 1 orbit to the second after Atlas's last recorded pass, like a marker, a timestamp left for someone to notice. And that precision bothered everyone, because the odds of that timing happening naturally were smaller than a cosmic miracle. It wasn't drifting randomly through the stars. It was following a schedule. Somewhere deep in a basement beneath the European Space Agency, a remaining handful of Horizon 9 analysts compared the 2 waveforms, the first and the last. When overlaid, the signals formed a mirror image, a perfect reflection, collapsing into itself. Together they created symmetry so pure it almost looked artificial, like something closing a loop. And then someone noticed something subtler. The faint delays, fractional distortions deep inside the curve, weren't random either. When charted out, the distortions traced an orbit. Not of the object, of us. The delays were small recalculations for every position the Earth had taken since its last pass, as if the object knew where it was returning to. And that's when the theory changed, from travel to homecoming. What if it wasn't passing through? Eleanor Ruiz's old note read. What if this system was its anchor, and we were never watching it leave, but watching it return? The idea tore through Horizon 9 like wildfire. Maybe 3I Atlas wasn't sent to us. Maybe it's from here, a relic from an age so far buried in time, its creators no longer exist to claim it. A child of an ancient civilization, wandering until gravity pulled it back to the place it began. And if that was true, then Earth wasn't its destination, it was its cradle. Soon, astronomers began scanning old records, digging through millennia of sky charts, searching for any trace of a similar object in historical records. Unverified medieval entries, Babylonian star logs, a few fragments in Sanskrit texts describing the metal star that fell no shadow, nothing solid. But there was always a strange pattern. Every few millennia, a mischarted object would appear, then vanish, always with the same trajectory, always the same angle of approach, each appearance perfectly in sync with planetary cycles. Some began to see a haunting possibility that Atlas had always been here, circling in silence, surfacing only when something below noticed it, like a guardian or a mirror. In the following months, the final burst signal was tested, decoded, modeled, and found to be strangely hollow, almost as if the data had been emptied. Every line of code led nowhere. Every spectral variance pointed to blank space. Until one intern, a quiet mathematician from Warsaw, noticed something strange buried in the modulation baseline. The final pulse, when slowed down nearly 1,000,000 times, wasn't silent at all. It contained a faint resonance, a modulation shaped almost identically to atmospheric noise. Not outer space, our own Earth, reflected back at us. No message, no command, just a mirror. And then came the final discovery. When plotted as coordinates, the internal pattern of the pulse perfectly matched the outer form of the first one, a mirror signal, closing itself in symmetry, the symbol of completion, of arrival, of homecoming. The message, if it ever existed, didn't say, "We are here." It said, "We have returned." The last observation changed nothing and everything at once. To most, it was a line of forgotten code, an old frequency that no longer held meaning. But to the few who had been watching since day one, it was something else entirely. A promise kept, that whatever had once come through our skies still remembered the way back. And maybe that was the point all along. Maybe it had never cared if we understood. Maybe all it wanted was to prove the loop could close. That all things which wander, no matter how far, how strange, how lost, find their way back to the silence that made them. Now, when the night sky is clear and trace beams from old satellites flicker in near invisible arcs, astronomers say you can feel the echo, not as sound, not as light, but as a rhythm, a pulse that seems to hum through the emptiness. 6 hours on, 6 hours off, still breathing, still waiting. Maybe that was never a machine at all. Maybe it was memory. And maybe the universe is full of these memories. Quiet observers watching their origins fade. Not passing by us, not trying to reach us, just finding a way home.